Jeff Bezos gave away $38 billion and still came out the loser. That is the fact at the center of this story. And the reason it lands that way is because the woman who received that $38 billion did not want it the way he expected her to. She had already decided who she was going to become. He just had not caught up yet. There is a video from the Vanity Fair Oscars party in March of 2026. Lauren Sanchez is on the red carpet. Photographers are positioned. She is posed and ready. Jeff walks up beside her, the wealthiest man in the world, a man whose net worth has at various points exceeded $200 billion, and she turns to him with an expression that has no warmth in it, and gestures for him to move. She waves him out of her frame. Like an obstacle. Like a stranger who wandered into her shot. He steps aside. He smiles. The smile does not reach his eyes. Body language analysts who reviewed the footage describe his expression using a specific clinical phrase, performed happiness. That is not a small phrase. Performed happiness is what you call a person who is going through the motions because the cameras are present, not because the feeling is genuine. And if you watch that footage with this story in the back of your mind, you cannot unsee it. Now hold that image. Hold the red carpet, the icy glance, the dismissal. And place beside it what Mackenzie Scott was doing that same week. No red carpet.
No photographers. No couture.
She quietly transferred $700 million to a collection of non-profit organizations working on causes that most major donors ignore. She did not announce it. She did not post about it. A researcher tracking philanthropic data found it and reported it. The money had already moved. The work was already in motion. And she had already moved on to the next decision. One woman needed the cameras. The other one never wanted them. And what is now unraveling inside Jeff Bezos' marriage is precisely what Mackenzie Scott understood would happen. She understood it before the affair became public knowledge. She understood it before the National Enquirer published those text messages in January of 2019. According to people who knew them well, she understood it before Jeff fully admitted it to himself. This is not a story about romantic rivalry. This is a story about a choice made by a man who believed he was upgrading his life, and what that choice is now costing him, in ways that cannot be settled with a check. To understand why Mackenzie always knew, you have to go back to where it started. Because their beginning was real. And that is what makes the distance between then and now so brutal to calculate. In 1992, Mackenzie Tuttle was a Princeton graduate who had studied creative writing under Toni Morrison, one of the most demanding literary mentors in the 20th century. She took a position at the hedge fund D. Shaw in New York City. And on the first day she was aware of Jeff Bezos, she had not yet met him. She could hear his laugh through the office wall. This specific, honking laugh that made her curious before she had any context for it. She requested him as her interviewer. She got the job. Within 3 months, they were engaged. 6 months later, they were married in a ceremony that cost almost nothing. Jeff Bezos was not wealthy. Amazon did not exist. This was two brilliant people choosing each other with no calculation involved. In 1994, when Jeff came to Mackenzie with the idea for an online bookstore, she did not simply support the plan. She executed it beside him. Picture the specific image. Mackenzie driving their beat-up car from New York to Seattle while Jeff sat in the passenger seat typing what would become Amazon's founding business plan. When they arrived, Mackenzie became employee number 1. She handled the accounting. She negotiated early contracts. She packed books in the garage of their rented home on nights when they could not afford additional staff. They drove a 1996 Honda Accord that they kept until 2013. Jeff, in those years, refused to schedule early morning meetings because he wanted breakfast with his family. He helped with dishes. He was Mackenzie's first reader on her fiction, giving her notes, giving her encouragement. That detail, the breakfast, the dishes, the first reader, matters. Because it tells you who Jeff was when Mackenzie chose him. That version of Jeff is gone. And the question worth sitting with is not when he disappeared, but when Mackenzie first noticed. Friends close to the family say the shift began sometime in the late 2000s. The late nights first, then the weekend trips, then the media attention, then Blue Origin in 2000, then the compound identity of Jeff Bezos as visionary, as space pioneer, as the face of the future. Mackenzie receded. She focused on their 4 children. She pursued her writing. She published 2 novels that most people never sought out because her husband's shadow had become too large for anything beside it to catch light. The woman who made the first move, who heard a laugh through a wall and asked for that specific interview, had become invisible inside her own marriage. Not violently. Not dramatically. Gradually, which is worse, because gradual invisibility is harder to name and harder to escape. And then came Lauren Sanchez. According to reports, the relationship began sometime in 2018. Lauren was a former television news anchor and licensed helicopter pilot, married at the time to Hollywood agent Patrick Whitesell. Jeff was married. Both were married. The National Enquirer had been tracking them for 4 months before publishing their exposé. They had intimate text messages. They had photographs. They had enough. On January 9, 2019, Jeff and McKenzie issued a joint statement announcing their divorce. Exactly 24 hours later, the Enquirer published everything. The timing was not coincidental. McKenzie knew what was coming. She chose to get ahead of it. She chose the language of the announcement carefully. She used the word friends. That word was not accidental. It was chosen by someone who had had time, potentially years, to decide what she wanted to say. The source of those leaked messages was traced, eventually, to Lauren's own brother. Michael Sanchez reportedly sold them to the tabloid for $200,000. Lauren had shared those intimate messages with a family member. That family member sold them. And this is the relationship Jeff believed was worth $38 billion. The divorce settlement was the largest in recorded history. $38 billion in Amazon stock, transferred willingly, without a prolonged legal battle. Jeff gave it up because he believed what he was walking toward was more valuable than what he was leaving behind. That is not the calculation of a man who had been deceived. That is the calculation of a man who was convinced. And the distinction matters. Reports from the early period of Jeff and Lauren's relationship describe a pattern that, in retrospect, reads differently than it did at the time. Lauren refused expensive gifts. She insisted on splitting restaurant bills. She presented herself consistently as an independent, successful woman who was not interested in access to his wealth. She was interested in him. For a man who had spent 2 decades as a target for people seeking proximity to his money, this behavior would have felt like oxygen. It would have felt like proof. But then the divorce was finalized. And then things shifted. The woman who refused gifts began accepting them. Medical professionals and cosmetic surgery analysts who reviewed photographic documentation of Lauren's appearance over a period of several years estimate that the visible changes represent procedures costing between $500,000 and $2 million. Jeff reportedly funded them. He saw it as Lauren becoming comfortable with his generosity. Psychologists who study relationship dynamics use a different framework. They call it the boiling frog effect. Each new accommodation feels reasonable in proportion to what has already been accepted. The trajectory becomes invisible precisely because you are inside it. You cannot see the pattern if you are the pattern. The Venice wedding in June of 2024 was the clearest evidence of how far the trajectory had traveled. According to sources close to Jeff, he initially wanted something private. Throughout his marriage to McKenzie, they kept their personal life deliberately contained. Small gatherings, controlled exposure, a consistent preference for quiet. But Lauren wanted 3 days. She wanted a global event. She wanted the transformation from regional news anchor to billionaire's wife documented and witnessed. When Jeff expressed hesitation, sources describe Lauren as furious. She felt he was not taking her seriously. She felt he was not showing the world what she meant to him. The final cost, according to Italian government officials, $76 million. For 3 days. The guest list included 200 people: Leonardo DiCaprio, Kim Kardashian, Oprah Winfrey, Bill Gates, many of whom, sources say, had limited personal connection to Jeff. They were Lauren's industry contacts. They added glamour. They added media coverage. Lauren wore 27 different designer outfits across the 3 days. Her primary gown cost an estimated $500,000. Her total wardrobe for the event exceeded $2 million. Professional social media managers were hired to document and promote every moment. That is not a couple celebrating love. That is a production. And Jeff Bezos, the man who drove a Honda Accord until 2013, funded it at $76 million. The backlash arrived quickly. Venetian residents organized protests. Amazon employees filed complaints on internal forums, noting the optics of a $76 million wedding staged while Amazon had conducted layoffs affecting more than 18,000 workers in 2022 and 2023. Jeff was eventually compelled to make substantial charitable donations to Venetian cultural institutions simply to manage the reputational damage. The man who built his reputation on frugality and strategic patience was doing damage control for a party. That sequence is not accidental, and it does not read as the behavior of a man who is in control of his own narrative. Now, less than a year after Venice, sources close to the couple are privately giving the marriage 12 months. Maximum. The Vanity Fair footage exists. The body language analyses have been published. Insiders who spoke to entertainment journalists describe Christmas and New Year celebrations in which Lauren's energy was relentless, jumping, dancing, laughing, while Jeff appeared, in the words of one source, wiped. Another account from a shopping trip in Aspen describes Lauren as upbeat and kinetic while Jeff moved at a quiet, exhausted pace. One source said plainly, he is clearly worn out trying to match her. The smile of freedom Jeff displayed in early 2019, when he believed he had found something real, has become, by 2026, the face of performance. He smiles when cameras are present. That is not the same thing. And through every moment of this unraveling, Mackenzie Scott has said nothing.
No interviews.
No cryptic social media posts.
No memoir.
No talk show appearances designed to recontextualize her version of events. Instead, she has given away $26 billion. In 2025 alone, she donated $7.2 billion to non-profit organizations. That figure exceeds the combined charitable giving of Jeff Bezos and Lauren Sanchez across their entire lives. Mackenzie is now the third most prolific philanthropist in the world. She has given away 46% of her net worth. She directs her resources toward racial justice, food security, education equity, and women's shelters, toward people who feel overlooked, invisible, forgotten. If you have ever been on the receiving end of slow erasure in a relationship where you once mattered completely, you understand why those specific causes carry the weight they do. Mackenzie also changed her name. Not to Tuttle, her birth name. She chose Scott, her middle name, creating an identity that belongs to neither her father nor her ex-husband. She built the name herself, and she is now known under it as one of the most consequential givers in the history of American philanthropy. While Jeff Bezos builds rockets to escape the planet, Mackenzie Scott is using her resources to repair it. While Jeff chases a space legacy, Mackenzie is building a legacy of structural change that will outlast the headlines and the red carpets and the $76 million parties. While Jeff forces a smile beside a woman who waved him out of her frame on camera, Mackenzie is quietly moving hundreds of millions of dollars to organizations working on problems nobody else is watching. She does not have to say a word. His choices are saying it for her. Mackenzie knew what would happen because she understood something Jeff did not understand about himself, that the man she fell in love with had already disappeared before Lauren Sanchez arrived. The affair was not the cause of what happened to their marriage. It was the confirmation of what had already happened. Jeff had slowly made Mackenzie invisible inside the life she had helped construct. And when she left, he did not replace her with someone who would challenge him the way she did. He replaced her with someone whose behavior suggests the money was always exactly what mattered. The man who built his entire career on understanding human motivation better than anyone else fell for the oldest pattern in the relationship playbook. She drove across the country while he wrote the business plan. She packed boxes in the garage. She raised 4 children. She kept him tethered to his own humanity during the years when losing that tether would have been easy. And she did all of it without asking for recognition. Without a camera present. Without 27 outfit changes. One woman showed up before the money existed. The other one showed up after it had already changed everything. The person who seemed to lose, who walked away with $38 billion but no longer had the life she had built from scratch, turned out to be the one who was never actually afraid to leave. And the person who believed he was free turned out to be the one who has been performing freedom ever since. What does the contrast between Jeff Bezos' current marriage and the life Mackenzie Scott has built tell you about what he actually walked away from? And do you think Mackenzie understood, even in those early garage years, that there was a version of Jeff who would eventually choose spectacle over substance? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel. For more interesting stories like this, be sure to click on the next video that pops up on your screen. You never know what you'll discover next.